Thank you for the invitation to present my academic work and artistic practice here. Before I get into the slides, I know slides can get, kind of run on a track of their own. Just to talk more informally, this started as an art practice about 5 years ago. I have a background in producing electronic music, and I started working with an EEG in 2018. And my first attempt at it was just the novelty of, could I do a techno set with my brain? Could I essentially DJ with my brain, where I do crossfades and change the EQ and the effects the way that a DJ uses, without touching the system at all, just through control of my brain state and different types of shifts in electricity, mostly by going in and out of meditative states, playing with that threshold between meditation and being more alert. So I did that successfully. I think one of the most fun things about that was this experience of being able to use a crossfader by kind of focusing left and focusing right and looking for real little shifts and beta waves between the left and right brain. And it wasn't a fast crossfade, but it did work. That was a lot of fun. And what ended up happening was I started to have these really transcendent experiences while performing. And so that's what I'll talk about. That was the beginning of this journey into more research and being able to, not just me have the experience, but groups of people to be able to have this type of experience. A little bit of background on what led me to be able to do this work has to do with these three parallel paths in my life. And they merged 5 years ago in this project. So I'm 47 now. When I was 13, I started dabbling with computer programming. So I was using a Tandy. I was creating these little text adventures, choose your own adventures with code. So I've been coding for a very long time and very comfortable with engineering, software engineering. The next thing that's a big component in this is electronic music. So I got my first drum machine in 95. And for me, that was a channel into expressing myself. So I grew up in the Midwest, a very stoic environment. And to be able to channel my feelings into music. I didn't like band, I didn't like orchestra, but once I found a drum machine and electronic equipment, I'd found my home and my musicality. And so using sound and using music to explore, enhance, and express emotions began there. And then meditation in 96. I think it started as a New Year's resolution, but I knew some people who were meditators. I was having conversations with them and started to meditate. And this gave me this foundation for exploring consciousness in a way that I'm very comfortable with. To be able to go into different states of mind and different depths of meditation is something that is pleasurable and exciting to me. So computer programming, music, and meditation merged into this new discipline for me 5 years ago. And that's what started in 2018. I've been using the Muse. I know it's not very high in terms of resolution or quality. I use it because it's very fast to prototype with. I hacked into their... I used their API for a year or two, and then when they pulled their API, I hacked into it as a generic Bluetooth device. It helped me really learn the nuances of doing my own fast Fourier transform, looking at the different brain waves, seeing what patterns come up. So from this work, I was able to design a pattern of all these different methodologies of looking at what the brain is doing and how to translate that into different musical expressions, from dynamics to EQ to composition, looping compositions, biomorphic compositions. The other nice thing about the Muse is there's a heart rate monitor on it as well. And so I can get my BPM, my heart rate variability, and use that in my compositions. Particularly for repetitive beats and techno, having access to the heart was a no-brainer. Pun not intended. In 2019, so in 2018 I was building it. 2019 I started a tour with it, and this was the tour I mentioned where it was essentially emulating my techno sets from the past. And the novelty of it was easy to book a lot of shows with this. People were very interested in using biometrics to create music, particularly in a form they were used to, like techno. But what started to happen, which totally unexpected, was I started having these transcendent experiences. So on stage, I started to either dive way down into theta. I remember at my second show, I forgot I was on stage. I'd never gotten that relaxed before during a performance. So I dipped into a theta state, and I lost track of time. I lost track of space. I forgot where I was. And so when I came out of that and opened my eyes, I was like, oh my God, I'm at a show. Like I'd completely forgot I was at a show. So a very deep theta state. And then at another show, I spiraled up into, I believe it was a gamma state. So it was this ecstatic, really transcendent state. And I just wept like a baby. I mean, it was really this overwhelming transcendent experience. And these were totally sober, so no chemicals were involved. This was just from neurofeedback. And I'd never had these before in 25 years of performing. You know, I've been excited, I've been bored, I've been tired, I've been super focused, but I'd never had these types of really high ups and high downs in terms of my brain state during performances. So in 2022, I started a master's program at NYU, and I started to research this, like, what were these phenomena? Are they repeatable? And I started to focus in on one specific phenomenon, and that was repetitive beats. And I looked at, a tradition of repetitive beats used in shamanism and in ancient Mayan rituals, and also fast forward to techno. What is it about techno that creates a trance state for people who, go into a warehouse and dance with a bunch of strangers in like a pretty sketchy part of town? Like, what is special about that trance that gets people to, go back to those? So I started doing these experiments where I played the exact same beat, just what I played right there. So it's a heartbeat with a little bit of white noise going back and forth. So I play that for a full hour. It's not a song. It's just a soundscape that doesn't change. And put an EEG, first I tested on myself, and then I drafted some classmates, bless them, and saw what did their brain do in the course of this hour. And what I saw was their brains go from an alert, mostly active in beta, down into a meditation, and then get down into that trance state, which was the theta waves were rising. And I realized that's what this trance state was. It was that state we are in right before we're falling asleep. But because there's some sort of beat, there's this music, there's this anchor, you don't fall asleep. And so you can stay in this waking dream state and have really fascinating access to your subconscious. And this was just those early experiments. So this is just 3-4 people looking at their EEGs. So going from beta, dipping down into alpha, and then resolving down into this really cozy, safe, subconscious trance state down in theta. And depending on the person and how, if they have trauma or hypervigilance, it takes longer. If they're really tired, it happens quite fast. But roughly, by 25 minutes, you're down into a theta state. And I started to look into sound design because when I was doing these tests on myself and on other people, I started to find that certain sounds work and certain sounds interrupted this process. So I studied and I looked into and studied psychoacoustics and looked at what are the elements that I can use to help guide this journey along, perhaps speed it up. And one was a 4/4 beat, which is very similar to a heartbeat. So this experience ends up being very similar to a womb. I mean, we all spent several months with essentially a big bass woofer above our head, our mother's heartbeat. And so in terms of universality of, a repetitive beat is something that we've all experienced. As soon as we're born, there's going to be divergence in terms of our culture and the music we hear. But having that 4/4 heartbeat is quite universal. The next thing was having repeating sounds. So there can be other elements as long as they repeat, because what I found is when new notes are introduced from scratch, that piques novelty in the brain, and that pulls someone out of a trance state back up into a more alert state of mind and trying to analyze something. The other thing I looked at was I was inspired by James Turrell and how slow he changes his light in his exhibits. And I call it a Turrell timescale. So the idea was changes can occur, but they have to happen so slowly that they don't alert, again, the higher frequencies in the brain, the more alert part of the brain. So if a change happens too quickly, it'll wake the person up. This is particular to psychoacoustics, the idea of really heavy reverb. So if a sound is up front, no reverb, really the front of the mix, it grabs our attention. It demands our attention, as if we're out in the plains, 1,000 years ago, and there's some sort of animal. Does it sound like it's close up and we have to address it immediately? Or does it sound like it's across the valley and it's, 2 miles away? If there's a heavy reverb, it feels like the source of the information is further, and that allows us to relax and feel safer. The other thing was soft dynamics, not having I do use a heartbeat sound, but I don't use a heavy clip or a strong attack on the kick drum. So it was really soft dynamics help the brain relax and stay in that slow down state. And then the last thing is something which was really fascinating to me, was increasing simplicity. And this is the key finding from this work, this thesis work, was in the beginning of this journey, the alert mind wants more stimulation. So there's more dynamics, there's more sound, there's more of a rich composition. But as it starts to move down into alpha and down into theta, into this trance state, continuing to have a rich soundscape will keep it alert. It will keep it from going into a trance. And so what I found is, as myself and others dive into this theta state, I have to subtract sounds. I have to make the soundscape simpler and simpler and simpler. And what that does is it creates more of an empty canvas for the subconscious to start to dream onto. Because if there's too much sound, there's not enough space for theta to emerge and the internal landscape to flourish. And then the next step was, what can I do to bring this to other people? In the future, I'll probably use more biosensors, but even just with me wearing a biosensor, can the sound itself bring people, just using sound design, bring people from, an alert state down into this waking dream state? That was my goal. And I was using both the brain and the heart, using the muse. And then the outputs were 3 different outputs, because I found the more ways that this signal can enter people's bodies, the stronger it is, the entrainment is stronger. So one is the soundscape. One is light, and so I have theater lights or DMX lights that I use that pulse at the rate of my heart, and the color changes based on my relaxation level. So red is alert, and then travels through purple, and then blue is very relaxed. And then the last part in terms of getting into the body is anyone who's been to, a rave or a techno show or a hip hop show with big bass knows the satisfaction of haptics. So that's the bass waves hitting the body. So I always have a big subwoofer in these performances so people feel the music as well as hear it. And I'll get into the numbers. This so this isn't a clinical test yet. So I plan to do a clinical test with NYU Tandon this year. So this is based on my thesis work, which was more user testing than it doesn't have a clinical quality to it yet. So you'll see a lot of estimates. So these are the different biometric biofeedback sound baths I did to date. And I have estimates of how many people were there based on registrations and the video footage. So I've documented everything well, and but don't have exact numbers because filling out a form was not required to attend these. This was me experimenting with a new sound design and seeing what works and what doesn't. So we have an estimated total of about 230 people who have experienced these sound baths. And then you'll see in the first one, a 0, I was just creating my first sound bath. I wasn't thinking about data collection yet. And so what I started to get as we went on was handing out forms where people could self-report, recording people, with audio recorders. And everything here is self-reported. There was nothing mandatory in terms of telling people, you have to share what you experienced in order to do this sound bath. These sound baths were more of a service to the community and people coming in who are interested in exploring it. And so the self-reporting is just self-generated. There was no form saying, did you experience loss of time? Did you experience loss of space? Did you experience ego dissolution? This was just their spontaneous shares. And so you've got these numbers of, over time about, I have 76 reports of these experiences. And the last part of this will be just talking about what these experiences were. The most people reflected in some way that it was a positive, relaxing, peaceful feelings came up for them. And then quite a few described a synchronization that happened. So as these bass waves and the sound and the light was hitting their body and their consciousness, and they're lying down, they're sitting, they're in a very comfortable place. So, they're not standing or there's no discomfort. They're in a very comfortable position. And so some of them even tried to keep their body from sinking by doing different techniques that they knew might speed up or slow down their heartbeat. And so this one person had said they had tried to stop their heart from sinking with mine by using a box breathing technique, but it kept sinking no matter what I tried. And so it's this idea of the soundscape was entraining their bodies. Another really common one was this idea of better access to their feelings, increased ability to work through emotional challenges by being in this subconscious state. And I think this is a territory that has piqued the interest of neurotherapists. So that's something I want to see in the future, is if this work could be useful, in terms of a service to mental health. Next was kind of this idea of waking dreams, people being aware that they're almost asleep, but they're lucid. They can think through things. Someone described it as fully immersing and exploring this dreamlike state. Another thing that came up was awareness of the body, both becoming aware of their body in a pleasant way, or pains that they were kind of pushing aside, came up. So this was, I think he was a MMA fighter. I'm not sure how he ended up at the sound bath, but he did. He said, I felt pains in my body from fighting earlier, and the soundscape brought my attention to them, and I couldn't ignore them. The focus brought blood flow to those areas, and the pain resolved. That was the only person who described such a, direct relationship with pain, but I thought that was a really interesting experience. Another thing that was very common were intellectual or creative breakthroughs. So not just emotional, but new ideas coming up for projects that we're working on, or artistic ideas coming up. So a lot of visual breakthroughs, creative ideas. As we go down the types of experience, quite a few people had a loss of time. Someone said, I was shocked to find an hour had passed. It felt like 15 minutes. And that's very common for theta. Theta is similar to when you're driving on the road and, kind of a highway hypnosis, and you miss several exits and you're like, how did I get home? So that's a theta experience. This one is important because it was a negative type of experience. So people talking about a dimension of pain. Actually, this is the wrong quote. That's the one from the previous slide. But people talking about there's the risk of using really strong bass is that it can bring up a sense of dread in some people. People associate low bass with like horror films, or from a psychoacoustic standpoint, it might be that a large animal is coming, or a thunderstorm, or earthquake. I found that people who go to techno parties or raves tend to like bass and feel it as this embracing, womb-like, noise or bass. But for some people, that would bring up these challenging feelings, and usually they would resolve in the course of the sound bath. But that was something that was reported repeatedly, was this emotional discomfort. And then we get into some of the psychedelic effects where there was body dissolution, ego dissolution, not knowing the boundaries of the body. One person had said, I dissolved out of my body and into the audience. I thought I was lying next to you and co-regulating my heart with yours. I felt like I became you. I'd never expected these types of kind of semi-psychedelic effects to hit. So I was always surprised when people talked about these really interesting effects where another one was someone felt like they became the size of the room and they were a large blood vessel. Really interesting effects. And then this is the last page. Improved meditation practice. I thought this was interesting. So not only during it using whatever meditation practice they're used to, but for periods of time after, so they'd write me after, and this person had said the experience prompted them to download a meditation app, and they had been doing it every morning since. So I thought that was interesting, that it introduced them or strengthened existing meditation practice. This is also, this is more the bass frequency one. The other one was, it brought up, to clarify, it brought up uncomfortable feelings in terms of things that they were struggling with. This is the one with the bass bends, where there were moments of where the low frequency stirred fear. And it would happen more often with people who are right in front of the speakers. They experienced it the most intense. If they were further away from the speakers, I didn't get this report as much. And then finally, and again, this wasn't a checkbox, so it could be that many more people experienced this, but this was just people on their own being asked, what was that like for you? And then sharing these things. So 5 people talked about it being a womb-like experience, like being transported into the womb. I guess there are feeling more connected to others, loss of consciousness. A few people blacked out entirely. And then this last one is one of my favorites. This was the experience of having a simpler and simpler soundscape coming from me, gave the space for this participant, their brain, to fill in the rest of the music. So it became this collaboration between her brain making music and the soundscape coming into her ears. And she had asked me afterwards, she's like, when did you add flutes to your sound bath? I was like, I didn't add any flutes. So she heard this whole flute arrangement and this sort of upbeat rhythm. And so she was conscious and having this full acoustic hallucination, which I thought was fascinating. I will stop screen sharing. The other thing I will mention briefly is that next steps would be to move into clinical testing. So moving it from this user testing, thesis work over to doing tests. So that's something I plan to do with NYU Tandon, which is the engineering school. They do a lot of health tech. And then something that just happened last week is I got hired to be faculty at NYU. So I'm teaching a music class there. So as faculty, I'll have access to more resources. So that's something I'm very excited about. If there's any questions, or if you want me to jump back certain slides or certain things that were confusing, I'm happy to hear any sort of questions or feedback that you have. And again, I just want to thank the whole team for allowing me to come here and present this research I've done. Thank you, Sarah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. That was very cool. And so I have maybe like, so in terms of the system that you're using for neurofeedback, you said you use that news thing. So you say that you use that for portability purposes. How much freedom does that allow for implementing your own analysis and like setting up the thing like in a more flexible way?
Definitely. So I created my own software, and so I'm getting direct access to the sensors, the raw data, and then running my own FFT. And so using their API, it is more limited. I don't know if you can get access to the full PSD, the spectrum, if you use their API. I think you can just get their summed alpha, beta, gamma, etc. So that was a huge advantage I was frustrated at first when they first pulled their API, but then when I hacked into it as a generic Bluetooth device, I got access to the raw sensor data. And that allowed me to do much deeper work. Yeah.
And so for the pre-processing step, how do you deal with that in terms of like cleaning the data before the fast Fourier transform?
I think there's some in the hardware. If not, what I've got in terms of the data, it is effective, particularly for the lower frequencies. So the PSD that I get is very good at detecting alpha. And then if all of the amplitudes are low, alpha is high and theta is second or highest, that's the moment where someone starts dipping into theta. I don't filter out the muscle tension, so those noise spikes. I use that as its own biometric because I found that when someone is very tense, that's a useful biometric. So I'm treating it also as an EMG rather than just an EEG. Now, if it's off completely, I use a machine learning model to detect because those numbers are just off the charts.
Right. So you have a machine learning that detects the deviant from. I see.
Yeah, so the noise.
And that operates like live, like in real time, I guess.
Yep.
So you train it before in resting state, and then you.
Yep. So what I did for training was took snapshots of what the PSD looked like when I had the headset off, just in open air on different surfaces, holding it, both in Europe and in the US, because I know there's different spikes at 50 or 60 from the wall outlets. And then did training when it's on, but it's loose. So, it's not really accurate information. So be able to detect that. And then things like forehead movement, jaw clenches, blinks, I all categorize as muscle tension. And then if it gets through all of that, then it starts analyzing the data as brainwave data. So the amplitudes are low enough and clean enough because it's a good enough fit. At that point, I start looking at alpha and theta. Beta is quite difficult. The Muse isn't good at those higher frequencies, beta and gamma. I did, after working with this device for 5 years, via ML, I was able to find a focus state, which reliably gets predicted when I move back into it. So that was a huge win. I couldn't find focus on it for a number of years until I did some machine learning, which could see patterns that I couldn't see with my naked eye. And so that ended up being useful. And what I do today is a combination between my own algorithms and the machine learning detection. And I find that's a good balance between the two.
And last question, in terms of instead of like sensory stimuli, what do you use for the neurofeedback? Like, for example, when you were doing your performances, what's the neurofeedback stimuli that you use to train?
That I received back?
Yeah.
So it'd be in the original performances or the sound baths?
The sound bath, I think that doesn't apply. But like when you were doing performances,
originally,
like shift. What was the feedback that you were using?
Totally. So for the original techno performances, what was happening was when I moved down into a more relaxed alpha state, I was using some EQ, but mostly low pass filters to trim off the top of the sounds at different levels. So, trimming the hi-hats and the snares, and because it was techno, and to make it a subbier, more subconscious feeling techno mix, that was like darker and adding a little bit of reverb, so it felt more dreamy. And what I found was by making the techno mix that way, it helped me relax by taking off those harsh highs and softening the attacks. And then when I would, become alert again, the full mix would brighten. And if I was stressed, I would take away the subs. And so it was more DJing than composing that first round, essentially using filters, EQ, and a reverb, wet-dry mix in order to create these different mixes of the same loops that felt like different states of mind. And I tried later with ambient, and didn't have those transcendent experiences. So that's why I went back to a repetitive beat. And that's what led into my research of what is it about the repetitive beat that was in that techno that allowed these profound experiences to happen to me that didn't happen when I had these kind of IDM biomorphic, when the brain waves would go up and down, the music would go up and down. Those are interesting, but they weren't transcendent.
So the music was the feedback and the output of your performance as well. So you were like, you did not use like cross-sensory stuff, for example, like use the visual. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So my brain was hearing the music that it was manipulating in real time, which created this really, I think that's what led to one of those transcendent states, was a sense of awe of, I'm manipulating sound waves that are passing through and hitting my own body. And the thing that's manipulating it is being hit by it. So that feedback loop was extremely powerful.
Thanks.
Great questions. Thank you.
Any other questions, guys? Thanks a lot, Jason. Very interesting.
My pleasure.
I wonder whether Chris had maybe some is a bit sort of into his field, or Tommaso, from the consciousness side of things.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to deal with a bank emergency, but I'll watch the recording. I'll come back with questions also because I'm very interested in biofeedback.
Great.
On different components. So I'll definitely look at it and then get back to you with other questions.
Great.
And maybe also suggest to Danielle and Kate, because, the whole thing with the temporal interference and EEG, and that's also feedback is involved there. So I think, unfortunately, some of them probably were not able to make it, and Danielle had to do something today. So, so they might bombard you later on. But, very nice of you, and thanks a lot for this. Very exciting.
Absolutely. And just a question about your department. It's the Center for Psychedelic Studies, is that correct? Or do I have the name wrong?
Yeah, so the research group here you are presented to, that is several people here, all the people here work in the Center for Psychedelic Research.
Great. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah. So we sit as part of Division of Psychiatry. So we had a division meeting earlier, which is broader and different kind of research in psychiatry. But we are, specifically, and Chris and Tommaso and people with them in a sub-team are focusing particularly on consciousness. So
Great.
Within the psychedelic, so using particular DMT and 5-MeO or DMC to study altered states.
That's great.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious how these types of neurofeedback loops can impact people both with psychedelics and without. So that's an intriguing space. I think that deserves a lot of research.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you doing that with anybody looking into that?
Yeah, I'm working on a build now that is just easier to send people, because right now my build works only on my computer. It's a prototype. But there's In the US, it's a lot more limited, so it'd be ketamine work. So there's a few clinics who have expressed interest in testing it and see if it's effective for their patients. But I don't think any that have access to DMT or psilocybin. That's, I think, much more difficult in the US as of now.
Yeah. So in a way, there might be an interesting match, something to continue discussing about, maybe particularly from those in the lab that are closest in themes to what you're doing. So it might be smart for them to watch and discuss whether there's maybe a follow-up conversation maybe to be had. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can just continue that in this slot, because you're based in the US, right, Jason?
Yeah, I'm in Berlin. I was in Berlin this month, but I'm usually in New York.
Yeah, let's see. So this afternoon slot is good. So
yep.
Yeah, so maybe people can consider that. All right, so we might end if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. This is
thank you so much.
Great to be able to present to you.
Great to have you.
Yeah.
Hope to meet you in person another time.
I hope to.
Come and visit us if you come this way.
I will. Yeah. That'd be great.
Great.
Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Gabriel.